And in fact, there were so many people arrested that we still do not know how many were there.
Pero yo creo que la evolución ha sido fundamental y sobre todo en el ámbito de la tortura.
Prisoners here also were not only disappeared, but we also lose our names.
I've always wanted to work in human rights.
I was here in Villa Grimaldi 209, and you don't forget that ever.
I still have some kind of personal issues, like feeling bad about, what I did and feeling bad about, having met victims and the next day went and ate lunch with Pinochet's lawyer.
When you lose your name in a place like this, and you are set in a number, you don't forget that.
La justicia es
Okay, we are here at the Park for Peace in Santiago de Chile. This is a memorial park built on the same site in which 30 years ago functioned the main torture center and disappearance center during the Pinochet dictatorship. So we will visit this park. I will take you around. I will show you some of the artifacts from that time, and we will try to reconstruct the history of this place as we know it today. Please join me.
We visited Villa Grimaldi, which was one of the main torture centers in Santiago, one of the more infamous ones throughout Chile. Pedro Mata was a political prisoner there.
Oh, please, something which is very important. My experience is nothing extraordinary. Don't believe that my experience is something out of the normal way that happened in Chile at the time. My experience reflects exactly what happened to thousands, tens of thousands of Chileans at the time. So don't think that my experience is something out of the ordinary in those conditions.
They've turned it into sort of a museum. They do some research into what happened and try to get the truth out to the public about what happened there.
I suppose when I compare my experience to Amanda's experience, what would stand out would be just the funding. I mean, the public defender is so underfunded there in comparison to the prosecutor. And then, she worked for a private attorney that defended accused human rights violators. And of course they deserve a fair trial as well, but I mean her office was quite lavish. And so it's just kind of interesting to see where the money is.
Over the course of 4 to 6 years in the early 70s, after Pinochet took control, they tortured thousands and thousands of Chileans, mostly left-wing, mostly socialist to communist on the spectrum of political affiliation, and per usual, the academics and the intellectuals.
At the torture center, it was very frequent the introductions of rats and spiders into women's vaginas to make women talk. One of the victims of this kind of torture, Chilean, actually a resident in New York, came to Chile 2 years ago to start criminal proceedings trying to identify the group of torturers that put her under this condition, and she had to suffer. We now know that there was a physician that was part of the interrogation, Dr. Victorio Orvieto, participating in the torture of prisoners. Dr. Vittorio Orvieto was living and was a resident of the United States.
For many years, General Augusto Pinochet was a dictator in Chile. When he left power, many victims of human rights violations committed during his reign sought to hold him accountable for those abuses. Unfortunately, their efforts to seek some type of redress, some type of hearing before Chilean courts were unsuccessful. In October of 1998, Pinochet traveled to the United Kingdom, and while he was in the United Kingdom, he was served with an extradition warrant by English officials, and he subsequently stayed for well over a year in England while the British courts determined whether in fact he could be extradited to Spain.
Aparte de lo que supuso frente al principio, hasta ese momento intocado, de la impunidad, es decir, supuso un ataque frontal a la impunidad. A partir de ese momento realmente es difícil afirmar que puedan desarrollarse impunemente acciones como las que se concretaron bajo la dictadura de Pinochet o la dictadura del proceso militar argentino, en Guatemala o en tantos otros sitios.
As a result of the detention of General Pinochet in London, the Chilean army officially recognized that they did throw out from helicopters a number close to 300 political prisoners to, I am paraphrasing what they said, to lakes, rivers, and to the sea in this country.
One of the interesting features about the most recent round of litigation involving Augusto Pinochet is that it really changes the dynamic. Prior to this litigation involving financial assets, the litigation involved the question of whether he was somehow complicit in human rights abuses perpetrated against individuals in Chile. And his defense, if any, was that any abuses that took place were necessary and inevitable in the process of promoting development in Chile. What is happening recently, though, is really undermining the credibility of Pinochet because it suggests that many of the actions that he took during his regime were for personal financial gain, not in the interests of the Chilean people or the Chilean government, but his own financial interests.
Para que puedan desocupar la plaza. Caso contrario, vamos a hacer una fuerza. Que desocupen el parlamento los parlamentarios, que desocupen la presidencia el presidente, pero nosotros no desocupamos nuestra nación, nación boliviana, es lo que somos y hemos vivido en el boliviana, pero nosotros no desocupamos nuestra nación, nación boliviana, somos y hemos vivido en el Chile.
En el sentido de que me detuvieron, nos acusaron, nos metieron, nos desaparecieron a todos también. Pasamos un proceso de tortura y desaparición. Y luego el tema era de que nos acusan. Y nos plantaron 13 cargos de acusación. Nos vaciaron el código, ¿no? En épocas de dictadura no había necesidad de probar, te acusaban y te metían. Y yo creo que intentaron lo mismo, pero en democracia hay mecanismos a través de los cuales dices que te tienen que probar de qué se te acusa. Llevamos cerca de 11 años de juicio y no tienen con qué probar la acusación que nos han hecho, pero ya pagamos 5 años de cárcel y casi 6 años de juicio afuera. Sin vistas de que se termine el juicio, 11 años. Uno de ellos, sin ir muy lejos, yo estoy acusado de 13 cargos como cómplice. Y los otros compañeros que han estado encarcelados conmigo son acusados en calidad de autoría de 12 cargos. Soy cómplice de un delito que no existe. Entonces, así de absurdo es todo este proceso, con demasiadas irregularidades, con ninguna prueba que admitida dentro de un procedimiento normal.
We take for granted, in the United States, we take for granted that you have a defense lawyer and that you get to, have an oral trial and you get to know what evidence is going to be used against you.
So I accepted his cigarette. He lightened my cigarette. He lights one for himself. And then he asked me, well, Flaco, and why are you here? Who are you? So I told him exactly what Dina knew at that point. Not a word more, not a word less. And he remained silent for a few moments. And then he said to me, Skinny, I said to them everything. So I remained silent. I understood a message. Skinny, I know you haven't said everything, and I would counsel you to say the rest because this is going to get worse. But in fact, he started a monologue, and I was privy to that monologue. The monologue was something like that. Skinny, they arrested me and they tortured me the same or worse than you. And I didn't talk. So they brought my wife and they tortured her and raped her in front of me. And I didn't talk. So they brought our son, 6 months old, in front of us. And they tortured our baby in front of us. And then I said to them everything. What would you have done? Gil, what would you have done? It's a question that has been always in the back of my mind. Because Dina didn't go as far with me. My son at that time was a year and a half old. And I do not know what would happen to me if they would have brought my son and tortured my son in front of me. It is possible that I would have become another collaborator. He was a collaborator. So it's very, very difficult to make straight judgments about the dynamics that are going on within a torture center.
I was actually taken by surprise because in my mind before going there, when someone would say, oh, I do human rights work, I thought, oh, you work for the good people. And I had talked to my supervisor before going there. He asked me what I was interested in, and I listed a few things, one of them being human rights, and he told me that we work in human rights, so I just assumed that they prosecute human rights violations. And so when I got there and went to work on the first day, he started explaining to me what they do, and I was kind of in shock, and I didn't really know what to say. I'm sitting there in his office, and I'm thinking to myself, I don't want to do this. I don't want to work here. I don't want to defend the military. This is the exact opposite of what I thought I was going to be doing. So I wasn't happy about it at first.
In 1976, a 17-year-old Paraguayan national, Joelito Filartiga, was brutally tortured and murdered in Asunción, Paraguay. The perpetrator of the abuse was Americo Peña Irala, a Paraguayan government official. Peña Irala subsequently left Paraguay and came to the United States. Soon thereafter, the Filartiga family discovered that Peña Irala was living in the United States. They then filed a lawsuit in U.S. court under the Alien Tort Claims Act, which allows victims of human rights violations to file federal lawsuits in U.S. courts against perpetrators of human rights violations.
En el sentido de que debe de haber víctimas nacionales, o debe de no existir una investigación en el otro país, o debe de impedirse la investigación. El principio de justicia penal universal ha sido restringido por nuevas legislaciones en el sentido de establecer la necesidad de unos puntos de conexión entre el país que desarrolla esta investigación y el lugar donde se han producido los hechos delictivos.
Dictaduras de Trujillo, Pérez Jiménez, Odría, Somoza, Stroessner, los militares argentinos, los militares bolivianos, los militares brasileños. Era toda una política del Departamento de Estado. Y todo eso constituía una fuerza política sin quererlo y le molestó a Stroessner. Entonces yo me di cuenta yo tenía miedo por mí y tenía miedo por mi familia, pero nunca creí que lo mataría a Juanito. Había un odio total y un apoyo total de la gente y una repulsa al crimen de Stroessner. Era voz populi que era el crimen de Stroessner. Entonces lo sacó del medio, porque nosotros hicimos un juicio allá. Y a pesar de tener todo el juzgado en contra nuestra, todo el tribunal en contra nuestro, llevamos adelante. Y eso le molestó a Stroessner y como una forma de hacer menos evidente al criminal allá. Le dijo, irte a los Estados Unidos por un tiempo, a ver si acá no se aplaca las. Y ese fue el origen del caso Pilar Díaz Peña, que tiene el largo andar en los Estados Unidos ahora y que queremos que esto no por una cuestión egoísta, por llevar nuestro nombre, sino deseamos que esta doctrina se mantenga para humanizar más la justicia en este gran país.
In recent years, the Alien Tort Claims Act has been used by a large number of plaintiffs raising a variety of claims. One prominent area involves lawsuits against multinational corporations for their overseas operations. On many occasions, multinational corporations will enter into joint ventures or similar contractual arrangements with foreign governments, and during these joint operations, human rights abuses are committed. The Alien Tort Claims Act allows the victims of these abuses the opportunity to sue these corporations in U.S. courts over the underlying violations of international law.
Cuánta violación de derechos humanos, cuánto dolor, cuánta muerte hubo detrás. Es como la pirámide de los faraones, que está lleno de sufrimiento y de. Toda gran obra está hecho por mucho sufrimiento y lo importante es que se haga una gran obra respetando los derechos humanos sin gran sufrimiento. Yo sé, por ejemplo, que la empresa Unocal, la Chevron, la Shell, se le está aplicando la doctrina filártica por violación de derechos humanos. Y es útil, pero estas empresas son poderosas y yo creo que va a haber gente que querrán abrogar, anular el caso filártica, pues les molesta. No tienen las manos libres para.
I had expected, you know, when you hear that the people you work for defend the military, I kind of expected them to follow along in this mindset of not really believing all of the numbers. Like, okay, obviously they know some of these things happened because they're defending it, but maybe not really believing how bad it was. And what I found interesting is that both my boss's family and the other lawyer that defended the, you know, in the human rights cases, they both had family members who had disappeared in the 70s and are still, you know, disappeared and are assumed dead at this point, but nobody really knows. And it struck me that they had been really personally affected by it, but were still willing to defend it because, you know, their philosophy is that that's what justice requires, and that, you know, they're lawyers and they're supposed to uphold justice, and that's what needs to be done, and it would be completely unjust, and that they would feel somehow like unsettled if these people didn't have a defense, if nobody would step forward and defend them. So I found that really interesting because, you know, I thought to myself, would I be able to do that if it was my family that it happened to? You know, it's easy for me. Well, it wasn't so easy, but it's easier for me looking on from the outside. I'm, you know, completely uninvolved in this, and I can read reports and read books and form my own opinions about it, but what would I do if it was my family? And I just thought to myself, I would never be able to do that. I wouldn't be able to sit there and defend somebody that I knew was involved in, my family member disappearing just because it's what justice requires. So I really thought, these people, and that's when they told me that, that's when I really kind of got hooked into, I really should continue to do this. And that's kind of what changed my mind about wanting to leave and not wanting to do it. So
this enemy could be a terrorist, an extremist, is something that his life is worthless. But their function as soldiers and defenders of the homeland is not only to destroy the enemy in his physical capabilities, but also try to destroy his dignity. You can certainly understand that through electrical torture, automatic movements in the body happens. Your body arcs when electricity passes along. In fact, the reason for that piece of leather on your chest is to maintain you in close contact with the back. And one of the effects, the very frequent effects for people that underwent electrical torture is back lesion, spine lesion, because of these forces that the electricity tried to force the body into arc, and this leather band that apply pressure in the other sense. But not only those automatic movements happen, it's also happen that you lose control of your sphincters, and that's a normal part of torture. So the way to destroy or to affect the dignity is to recover the defecation with a piece of paper and to force that defecation back into the mouth of this prisoner being tortured.
The Alien Tort Claims Act is important for several reasons. First, it provides victims of human rights violations with an opportunity to state their case. Oftentimes, victims of human rights violations don't have an opportunity to appear before their own country's courts to seek resolution of abuses that might have been committed against them or family members. Thus, the Alien Tort Claims Act provides these victims with a forum to hear their claims. It allows them to identify the alleged perpetrators, and allows the court, with proper evidence, to find or to issue a judgment against the alleged abuser. And so it's very important for the victims to give them a voice, to give them a forum to raise these serious claims.
Y no admiten hasta ahora una discusión abierta el tema de la presunción de inocencia, que es un tema fundamental y básico del nuevo código aquí y en toda América Latina, donde se pretende impulsar. Y eso es importante ahorita. Yo creo que diferentes organizaciones estamos implicadas en la defensa de este proceso.
Once Pinochet was detained in England, numerous human rights organizations played a critical role in assisting British prosecutors and Spanish prosecutors in bringing their case against Augusto Pinochet. I was fortunate enough to work on behalf of several of those organizations, providing legal assistance and advice with respect to the Convention Against Torture and other human rights norms.
Usually torture sessions in Villa Grimaldi were once a day, and there was also a reason to do that. Is to leave the prisoner time enough to recover from one torture session to the next one, and then for him to be able to survive.
I never could have imagined how you would defend somebody or what your justification would be, and my opinion on that has completely changed. I understand where people are coming from now, and not that I would necessarily agree with all of it, but I understand it. And I think that before going there, had I tried to, work on a human rights case as a lawyer, it's like I would have hit a brick wall, because I couldn't have imagined what kind of arguments people would have made or where people were coming from, and I just wouldn't have understood.
Nuestros hijos, nuestros nietos van a tener que verse a grandes desafíos. Y lo importante es que nosotros nos sentamos, que esta tierra que estamos usando ahora no es solamente nuestra, sino nos dieron los que pasaron y tenemos que entregarle un mundo un poco mejor a los que van a venir.
The best way to do your best at something is to see how the other side works first, to understand what's going to come at you from the other side.
Now, what is amazing, and it's a common experience, is that this prisoner that was on my left side didn't know me. And he didn't know my friend that was at the other side, and he risked his life. Just to transfer that very important piece of information for us. It's the meaning of this world for us. The meaning of solidarity, friendship.
En ese sentido creo que hemos contribuido un poco a hacer la situación un poco más justa y que la lucha contra la impunidad sea más positiva que lo era antes.
Oftentimes, victims of human rights violations don't have an opportunity to appear before their own country's courts to seek resolution of abuses that might have been committed against them or family members. Thus, the Alien Tort Claims Act provides these victims with a forum to hear their claims.
Ha permitido que la gente no solo juzgue a las autoridades, sino que sienta que no es un poder aparte, sino que la gente puede ser parte del proceso de justicia. Y eso es fundamental para el fortalecimiento de una sociedad civil en un Estado que ha sido en nuestra historia casi ausente en sus responsabilidades.
Lo más elemental es no hacer al prójimo, a otro, lo que uno no quiere hacer. Eso es elemental.